Hello, this is a pitching review of Dominic Ullery. This video was taken during our Titan baseball camp in early June. We're just going to give you kind of a crash course on some fundamentals of pitching mechanics. We'll talk about Dom's current mechanics and maybe some things that he can work on moving forward. Okay, so when we talk about pitching mechanics, we primarily focus on the 5 phases of delivery, which are hip load, hip lead, hip separation, release, and follow through. We spend most of our time on hip load and hip lead. Okay, we believe that the pitch and delivery is kind of like serves kind of like a domino effect. So if you get the first 2 steps right, then typically the rest of the delivery will follow correctly. If we struggle to get the first 2 right, then the opposite's also true, and it'll be really hard to get the rest for our body to kind of course correct and get everything else correct as well. So I'm just going to show you a little video here of Marcus Stroman on the left, just to kind of show you some basic principles of the delivery, and then we'll use that to look at DOMs and see what DOM can work on. Okay, so first phase is hip load. So during hip load, a couple things have to happen. First of all, with the leg lift, all right. I always tell kids to lift their leg towards their back, lift their knee towards their back shoulder or back ear. Now the height doesn't necessarily matter, but as they lift, I do want to see them go in that direction. The reason for that is because I want to see a little bit of a corkscrew with the hips. All right, so oops, wrong tool there. Okay, so you'll notice that as Stroman lifts, all right, he takes his hip pocket and he turns it towards home just a little bit so that his hips counter-rotate slightly. All right, he also elevates his front hip just a little bit. Okay, so I really try and look for those 2 moves during hip load. All right, and the best way to get there is to lift the front knee towards the back ear, back shoulder. Okay, we don't want the front knee to go straight up and down necessarily. We also don't want it to go straight back towards second base. All right, so that's hip load. Once we get through hip load, we move into hip lead. All right, so during hip lead, the hips go down the mound first. Front hip stays elevated, front shoulder stays elevated, trunk stays stacked over that back leg. All right. And if you also look at the back knee stays stacked over the back foot, and the hips sit back, so the butt sits back behind the heel. All right, this sets us up into rotation into front foot strike. It allows us to utilize our lower half, allows us to utilize our trunk correctly. So we always look for good hip lead. All right, if we can get hip load right, it sets us up for a good hip lead. If we can get a good hip lead, then everything else typically follows. So next is hip separation. Okay, so this is when the front foot lands. All right, this is like your classic power position. All right, the belt buckle is pointed towards home. The front of the jersey or the chest is pointed towards third. And then the arm is up and cocked at about a 90-degree angle, ready to throw. All right, both sides closed. Okay, this is basically where we create a giant stretch in our body, all right, called hip to shoulder separation. It's not something that we necessarily want to try to create artificially. It's all a result of getting hip load and hip lead correct that allows us to get there. And then from here, the body unwinds, kind of snaps like a rubber band, and we go into release and follow through. We don't spend hardly any time on release and follow through because it's all a result of everything that's happened previously in the delivery. Okay, so that's kind of a crash course on pitching mechanics. So let's take a look at Dom now. All right, so he goes into his windup. Everything's fine. Goes into his leg lift. Okay, so during his hip load phase, the front knee goes towards the back shoulder, back ear. That's great. Okay, I would like to see just a little bit of a twist with those hips. So turn it slightly towards second. And just a little bit of elevation with that front hip. All right, that'll set him up a little bit better to move into hip lead. Okay, because as you can see, as Dom starts to go down the mound, all right, everything's moving at the same time. So his hips and shoulders are both going downhill together. All right, and if you look at his front leg, all right, his front leg goes straight down and then he steps out. So basically he's using his front leg to move him down the mound. And as soon as we use the front leg as the dominant driver down the mound, then typically our glove side will leak open and will land open. And so by the time he's in the front foot strike, his body's already rotating open with his chest. And so now from this position, he's basically forced to throw all arm because he's not getting hardly any hip to shoulder separation. Okay, so the big thing for Dom is to work on getting his hips to go down the mound first. Okay, so a little bit of improvement is needed in the hip load. That'll set him up for better hip lead, all right, which is this phase right here, where we get the hips going down the mound first, the trunk staying back, stacked back over that hip, or over the hips, with the front hip elevated. Okay, you can see where Dom, everything's kind of flat, all right, and there's not much hip lead. Okay, so that'll be the big thing for him. I'm assuming he's also struggling, just it's kind of tough to tell from this camera angle, but I'm sure he's struggling to get his hips to sit back, get his butt to sit back behind his heels, so that will also be something he needs to work on as well as he starts to move down the mound. Okay, so those are just kind of some basic crash course on pitching mechanics and some things that Dom can look to improve on with his pitching. Okay, let me know if you ever have any questions. I'm an open book. I always enjoy talking baseball and pitching. I appreciate your time, and go Titans.